In the serene heart of Abuja, tucked inside a quiet estate lined with palm trees and high fences, lived Mr. Frank and his wife, Lilian. On the outside, they had everything people prayed for: wealth, respect, luxury cars, and a house that looked like something out of a real estate magazine. But inside, their hearts carried a secret pain. 20 years of marriage. No child. They tried everything: IVF, endless prayers, fasting, even specialists in London and India, but each attempt ended in heartbreak. At first, they held each other through the pain. But as the years went by, the silence in their house grew louder. The rooms were too clean. The toys they once bought in faith gathered dust in storage. Lilian would sometimes stand by the nursery window, staring into nothing, imagining what a baby's cry would sound like in their home. Frank, a calm and quiet man, never blamed her. But Lilian blamed herself. "It's me," she would say on nights she couldn't sleep. "You should have remarried. I'm the one stopping your legacy." Frank would hold her close and whisper, "I chose you, not just to have a child, but to live, and I'm not leaving you." One day, after another failed IVF, Lilian came up with a desperate idea. It sounded wild, even to her own ears, but she couldn't shake it off. "What if we pay someone to carry your child?" she asked Frank. Frank looked up from his tea, confused. "Like a surrogate?" Lilian shook her head. "Not the medical way. A real woman. A womb for hire." Frank dropped his cup slowly. "Lilian." She placed her hand on his. "I've thought about it. If we find someone who doesn't want a child, someone desperate, we can pay her. No strings attached." Frank refused at first. "That's dangerous. That's a human being, not a business." But Lilian pleaded. Weeks turned to months, and eventually Frank agreed. And that's how they met Susan. Frank met Susan on a Friday night, the same night he finally gave in to Lilian's plan. He wasn't used to clubs. He was a businessman, not a nightlife type. But Lilian told him, "That's where you'll find the kind of girl we need. Someone with no attachments, no drama. Just money on her mind." So he went. The music was loud. The lights were dim. Bodies moved like waves. Frank sat in a corner booth, stiff and awkward, nursing a glass of water. Then she walked in. She was tall, brown-skinned, curvy, with bold red lipstick and a tight black dress, and she was stunning. She moved like she owned the room. Not loud, not aggressive, just confident. When she caught Frank staring, she smirked and walked straight to him. "Big man," she said, sliding into the seat beside him. "You look like you need company." Frank swallowed hard. "Maybe I do." They talked a little. Nothing deep, just flirtation and fake laughs. Then she leaned close. "So, we going to your place or mine?" Frank paused. He wasn't here for that. But this was the moment. "My place," he said quietly. Susan smiled. "Thought so." They left the club, got into Frank's car, and drove in silence. She expected what most men wanted. But the house surprised her. Gated, beautiful, clearly a home, not a bachelor's hideout. She stepped inside, heels clicking against the marble floor. "Nice place. Where's the bedroom?" Then she heard another voice from the stairs. "Welcome, darling," Lilian said, walking down slowly in a silk robe. Susan blinked. Her eyes darted from Frank to Lilian. "Wait! Your wife is home." Frank stood beside his wife, calm and serious. Susan raised her hands. "Okay, hold on. You're into some weird, freaky stuff? Because I don't do couples." "Sit down," Lilian said gently. "Please." Susan hesitated, but something about Lilian's eyes told her this wasn't what she thought. She sat down. Frank cleared his throat. "Susan, this is not what you're expecting." Lilian spoke next. Her voice was soft but tired. "We brought you here because we need your help." Susan raised a brow. "My help?" Lilian nodded. "We want you to carry a child for us." A heavy silence filled the room. Susan stared at them, confused. Frank explained, "This isn't an adoption or donor situation. I'll sleep with you once. You'll get pregnant, carry the baby, and after birth, you walk away with $30,000. No strings attached. Susan blinked. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Lilian leaned forward. We don't want a relationship. Just a child. We'll handle everything. Your food, your hospital bills, your comfort, even your protection. Susan sat back slowly. So, you want me to be a human incubator? Neither of them spoke. Then she looked at the expensive furniture, the way they were dressed, the sincerity in Lilian's tired eyes. $30,000? She asked. Cash. Once the baby is handed over, Frank confirmed. Susan folded her arms. She'd done worse for less. She took a deep breath and said, Okay, I'll do it. She had no idea how much that yes would change her life. The next morning, everything moved fast. Frank and Susan visited a private fertility clinic for a full medical screening. HIV, fertility, general wellness. It was all part of the deal. Frank wanted to be sure. Susan, used to living by the night, had never been to such a high-class hospital in her life. She joked with the nurse, Hope this test will not remove my beauty. Frank chuckled awkwardly. Susan was bold, too bold, but it was part of her charm. Once the results came back clean, the doctor gave them a thumbs up. You're both medically fit. You can proceed whenever you're ready. That evening, Frank drove Susan back to her small apartment in Gaki. It was nothing like his home, just a one-room flat with a mattress on the floor, clothes hanging on the door, and a mirror with cracked edges. Susan looked around and sighed. Let me just pack a few things. No need packing what's not necessary. She threw a few dresses into a duffel bag, grabbed her toothbrush, her charger, and her wig. Then she turned to Frank. So, I'm officially your wife now, right? Frank didn't smile. No, he said softly. You're doing us a favor, but don't ever forget the terms. Susan smirked. Relax. I'm loyal. I was just joking. By nightfall, she moved into the couple's mansion. Lilian had already prepared a guest room for her. Pink curtains, a queen-size bed, even prenatal vitamins on the nightstand. It was strange and awkward. Susan, used to men treating her like date, had never been welcomed like this. But still, her mouth remained sharp. Madam, she called out one morning from the dining table. This your cook is good. The meals are really tasty. Lilian forced a smile. Thank you, Susan. Eat well. It's good for the baby. 2 weeks later, after the agreed moment of intimacy with Frank, cold, awkward, and mechanical, Susan missed her period. A test confirmed it. She was pregnant. Lilian broke into tears the moment the doctor confirmed it. She hugged Frank like she hadn't in months. Then she turned to Susan. Thank you, she said, voice shaking. Thank you so much. Susan rubbed her belly, shrugged. You're welcome-o. Just make sure my money is complete. From that day on, everything changed. Susan stopped going out at night. She deleted her clients one by one and blocked their numbers. She started sleeping better, eating more, and watching TV shows about babies and motherhood. But she was still Susan, loud, dramatic, unpredictable. Sometimes she would argue with the cook. Other times, she'd blast music too loud or complain about the house rules. Lilian never shouted. She endured. No matter how rude or childish Susan got, Lilian smiled through it. Every time she wanted to respond, she would whisper to herself, just wait till the baby is born. To her, Susan was not a guest. She was a vessel carrying her miracle. And for that reason, Lilian was ready to swallow any insult, even from a former prostitute. 9 months came faster than anyone expected. Susan was heavier, quieter, and strangely more gentle. She no longer danced around the house or argued with the cook. Most times, she just sat by her window, rubbing her belly in slow, silent circles, talking to her unborn child like he could hear every word. My baby, you're gonna be strong. You're gonna be fine. Mummy loves you, okay? No matter what. Lilian noticed the change. She saw the way Susan's eyes softened every time the baby kicked. How she now played soft gospel music instead of loud Afro beats. How she cried alone sometimes. Frank noticed it too. She's getting attached, he said one night to Lilian in their bedroom. Lilian nodded slowly. Let's just wait. Once the baby comes, We'll handle everything. But nothing could prepare them for what came next. A few weeks later, on a Monday, the labor started at 2 a.m. Susan screamed so loud the guards outside rushed in, thinking there was a robbery. Lilian and Frank helped her into the car and drove to the hospital. It was a long, painful labor. But at exactly 6:13 a.m., a baby boy entered the world with a loud, beautiful cry. Susan held him first, and the moment she did, something inside her broke. Tears rolled down her face like rain. She kissed his forehead over and over again, whispering, "My baby, my prince, my gift." 3 days had passed since Susan gave birth. She was back home now, lying in the same guest room, but nothing about her felt like a guest anymore. Not since she held that child in her arms. The baby boy was perfect. Dark curly hair, bright innocent eyes, soft skin, and the most calming cries Susan had ever heard. Each time he looked up at her, it was like he already knew her voice. Like they were connected in a way nobody could break. She hadn't slept much. Not because of stress, because she didn't want to miss a second of watching him breathe. Lilian had been waiting. Frank too. But Susan hadn't allowed anyone near the baby, not even for a minute. She just needs time, Lilian told herself over and over. But on the fourth night, Susan called Lilian on the intercom. Her voice was calm. "Please, come to my room. You and Mr. Frank. I have something to say." They both walked into the room. Susan was sitting up, the baby in her arms. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her face was calm. Too calm. Lilian moved closer. "How's he doing?" Susan looked at her, then at Frank. "I've made a decision," she said quietly. "I can't give him up." The room went still. Frank frowned. "What?" Susan's voice cracked, but she held the baby tighter. "I carried him for 9 months. I felt every kick, every hiccup, every turn. I was going to give him to you. I really was. But now that he's here, I can't. I won't." Lilian's heart dropped. "No, Susan, please, don't do this," she whispered. Susan wiped her face. "He's my baby. I love him. I didn't expect to. But I do. And I can't hand him over like luggage." Frank stepped forward, his voice rising. "We had a deal. We kept our end. We treated you well. Paid for everything. You can't just change the terms." Susan looked at the baby. "You can come visit him. I'll never stop you. But I won't give him up. I'm his mother." Lilian knelt beside her, tears welling up. "We've been married for 20 years, Susan. We've tried everything. You were our last hope." "I know," Susan said, trembling. "And I'm sorry, but this child has changed me." Frank paced the room. "We'll increase the pay $50,000. We'll transfer it now. Just give us our son." Susan shook her head. "I don't want the money. I want my child." Frank exploded. "This is betrayal." Susan snapped, still holding the child close. "No. What's betrayal is asking a woman to give away her baby and expecting her not to feel anything." The room went quiet again. Susan took a deep breath and whispered, "I know I came here with one mind, but everything changed the moment I held him. I'm sorry, but I won't let go of my child." Frank looked at Lilian, helpless. Lilian just stood there, frozen, like something inside her had died. Then she walked out, silently. Days turned to weeks. The once warm house now felt cold. Susan rarely came out of her room, except to gently rock the baby in the garden each morning. Frank stopped talking completely. Lilian tried. She begged, prayed, and knocked gently on Susan's door every few days. "Can we talk?" she'd ask softly. Sometimes Susan let her in. Most times, she didn't. She had already packed her things. One small box, one bag. She was ready to leave with a child she had promised to walk away from, but now couldn't. Frank even tried involving a lawyer, but Lilian stopped him. "She's not the enemy," she said. "She's a mother." Still, the pain in Lilian's heart was unbearable. For the first time in her life, she felt what it meant to be empty in a house full of everything. Then one evening, just as Susan was folding baby clothes, Lilian walked into the room without knocking. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. Susan looked up and sighed. Madam Lilian, please, don't start again. But Lilian didn't speak. She just stood there for a second, then fell on her knees. Tears rolled down her face as she spoke in a voice so raw it silenced the room. Please, help a barren woman. Susan froze. Lilian clutched her chest as she cried harder. I'm the one with the problem. That's why my husband was able to get you pregnant. I've been to over 5 countries, tried everything. Nothing worked. She sniffled and continued. I even begged him to marry another woman. I said, Frank, take a second wife. Give yourself a child. But he refused. He said, I'd rather grow old with you and be childless and betray the vows I made at that altar. Susan sat still. The baby was sleeping on her lap. I was the one that suggested you. I begged him. You don't know how many nights I cried before I brought up the courage to ask. She crawled closer, her voice shaking. Please, Susan, I know you love him. I know he's yours. But let me love him too. Let me raise him. Let me be a mother, even if he never calls me mummy. Let me just be the one who watches him grow. Please, you can come. You can visit him. You can take care of him anytime you want. I will never stop you. But please. Her voice cracked again. Please help a barren woman. Susan's eyes burned. She looked at the crying woman on the floor and suddenly felt something shift in her chest, a heaviness she didn't understand. Slowly, she stood up, walked over, and knelt beside Lilian. She placed her hand gently on Lilian's back. Stop crying, she whispered. Please, stop. Lilian looked up at her, broken. Susan's lips trembled as tears ran down her face, too. I didn't plan to love him, but I did. I didn't know what motherhood felt like until he looked at me. But she took a deep breath, her voice shaking. But I can't ignore your pain either. Susan hugged her tightly. Then she whispered, I will give you the baby. Overwhelmed with emotion, Lilian hugged Susan tightly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. The house was quiet the morning Susan was set to leave. Her bag was packed. Her passport tucked neatly beside a sealed envelope that held her travel documents, her new ID, and a one-way flight ticket to New York. Lilian and Frank had arranged everything. A fresh start. A chance for Susan to begin again. Away from the pain. Away from the memories. Away from the child she would never forget. But in the guest room, Susan sat on the bed, holding her baby boy for the last time. She had dressed him in a white onacy with little blue stars. He looked up at her and gave a tiny smile, not knowing his world was about to change. Susan rocked him slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know if you'll remember me, she whispered, but I'll never forget you. Lilian stood at the door, watching in silence, her heart breaking for the woman who had given her everything she couldn't give herself. Susan kissed the baby's forehead one last time. Then she stood up, walked over to Lilian, and placed him gently in her arms. But just before she turned away, she stopped and said, Promise me. Lilian looked at her, eyes heavy. Promise me you'll take care of him, that you'll love him, that you'll protect him like he's your own flesh. Frank stepped closer. We promise, with all our hearts. Susan nodded slowly. Then she broke down completely. She hugged Lilian tight, the two women holding each other like sisters bound by something deeper than blood. Frank reached for Susan's bag. The driver is waiting. Susan wiped her face, straightened her back, and gave the baby one last glance. Then she walked out of the house, her steps heavy, but her heart relieved. By afternoon, she was on a plane, her new life ahead of her. And in the quiet halls of the mansion, the cry of a child echoed once again. Only this time, it was not a cry of loss. It was a beginning of something new. A family reborn. Months passed. The house that once echoed with silence now danced with the sounds of laughter, baby giggles, and soft lullabies. Lilian would sometimes sit for hours just watching her son sleep in his crib, hand on her chest, tears in her eyes. Frank had never seen her smile this much. She fed him, bathed him, sang for him, held him tight during thunderstorms and kissed his forehead every morning. They named him Nathaniel, gift from God. And indeed, he was. Sometimes, Lilian would wake up in the middle of the night and just walk to his room, just to make sure he was still there. Still real, Frank became a different man too. Softer, happier, always rushing home early, always sneaking in kisses to his wife and son. He had finally become what he dreamed of for over 2 decades, a father. They didn't hide Nathaniel's story. They told people he was a blessing, a miracle. Not everyone knew the full details, but the ones who mattered did, and they loved him all the same. As for Susan, she started a new life in the United States, a small apartment in New York. She took a short course in caregiving and began working with a home agency. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, clean, and for once, she had peace. She was happy with her new life. Though she thought about her son from time to time, she knew he was in good hands, and that brought her peace. She was proud that she had given someone else the hope of becoming a mother, and in return, she was given something too, a second chance at life. In the end, love won. Not just romantic love, not love that possesses, but the kind of love that gives, that lets go, that sacrifices. Frank, Lilian, and little Nathaniel lived happily. Their home now echoed with joy, love, and the sound of new memories being made every day. And Susan, in her quiet corner of the world, lived with peace in her soul and hope in her future. Moral of the story: not every mother is the one who gives birth. Sometimes, the truest kind of motherhood is found in the woman who chooses to love, nurture, and never give up. This story teaches us that true love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes, it's found in the courage to let go. In a world full of broken dreams, it is compassion, not contracts, that creates real family. Thanks for watching. Make sure to share your thoughts in the comments. What did you learn and love about the story? Give it a thumbs up and share it with your loved ones. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do so. See you in the next story. Bye.